We're in Leicester tonight, and welcome to Question Time. Good evening to all of you watching at home and to our audience here, and of course to our panel, a Conservative Culture Secretary and Equality Minister, Maria Miller, Labour's Shadow Environment Secretary, Mary Cray, the Liberal Democrat peer Susan Kramer, who sits on the Parliamentary Commission investigating the banks, the Respect MP, George Galloway, who returned to Parliament last year after the Bradford West by-election, and the editor of The Spectator, Fraser Nelson. Well, I'm not sure our first question will come as an amazing surprise to everybody. It's from Nadine Lines, please. Nadine Lines.
Who is to blame for the horse meat scandal? Is it profit-driven supermarkets, incompetent food industry regulators, or consumers demanding ever cheaper food?
So we've got three options: profit-driven supermarkets, incompetent regulators, or consumers wanting cheaper food. Mary Cray.
Well, I think it has to be... I'm not going to blame people on very low incomes for wanting to buy meat products for their families to feed them that are good value. So I'm certainly not going to blame consumers for wanting a good deal when everybody is really feeling the squeeze from wages stagnating and prices going up. But I do think there is an issue about what is happening to the food system. I think there's an issue about criminal, systematic adulteration of the food system, which we now know spreads across Europe. And I think that the processors have been too quick to look for very cheap meat, and the supermarkets have also perhaps pressed them down on prices and not conducted some of the testing that they could have done to get ahead of what is now a very widespread problem.
I mean, it seems to get, by the minute, more and more stories come out, more and more supermarkets withdraw stuff. Is any of it dangerous, or is it just a matter of being lied to by people, that you think you're buying beef and you're getting horse meat instead?
Well, people have a right to know that the food that they're buying is correctly labelled, is legal and is safe for them to eat. And what started out as a bit of a, 3 or 4 weeks ago when Ireland announced they'd found the adulteration in the burger products, it was a bit of a joke. There were a lot of horse jokes going around. I think with last week's developments with Findus, where we saw that it was coming in from another route, from continental Europe, the events that we've seen even just this evening with arrests taking place this evening, with schools, Staffordshire County Council withdrawing products in its schools, and it now turning up in a fresh product this evening in a supermarket. I think we're finding that it's actually it's much more widespread than we could have first thought. And obviously, the more you look for it, the more you find.
You, sir?
Could this food crisis have been prevented had the Labour government in 2003 not withdrawn random processed meat testing?
Well,
Fraser Nelson.
I'm rather waiting for Mary's answer on that.
Yes, well, you'll get it in a moment, but she's had two answers already.
Well, it's certainly true that the Food Standards Agency was Labour's creation, and at the time the Conservatives were saying, look, these guys are not going to be able to keep a proper check on the supermarkets. But I don't think you can blame either Labour or the government for this. This is the problem simply of the food companies. I would lay the blame squarely at Medora Findus. I mean, we've been amazed by the length of the supply chain, the Swedish company using sort of Cypriot, Dutch, French, Luxembourg, all these companies. And in a way, it's not surprising that a scamster would try to insert some fraudulent product into that supply chain. But who's responsible for making sure? I think it's the company, and I think the company should be punished.
See, for the last 10 years, we're not sure what meat we've been eating. And what I'm really annoyed about is the fact that that's happened. For the last 10 years, we do not know. Now we're being told that it's just horse meat, it's safe. How do we know that?
Okay.
We do not know how this meat's been transported, processed or stored.
OK. George Galloway.
But the back end of the pantomime horse has to be government. We don't elect Findus, we don't elect food companies, we elect government to protect us. And the reality is that not only, as you put it, did the Labour government abandon random testing of processed foods, but the Tories have cut 700 food standards officers. Now, what kind of false economy is that? What's the cost to the country as a whole? And they say, they throw their hands up and say, we didn't know what was going into the food. Well, if they didn't know horse was going into the food, what else is going into the food that they don't know about? That's the point. That's the point. And so the answer to the question, David, is the responsibility lies with profiteering food companies, yes, but the people who are supposed to regulate the activities of business in this country are the elected politicians, and they're just not even at the starting gate on that.
OK, well, we've got two. We've got the former Labour and the current Tory. Let's come to the Tories first. Have you cut 700? Was that the figure you gave? Food
yes,
officers?
700.
I think what the Chief Executive of the FSA has made very clear that she has exactly the right resources that she needs.
Well, she would say that. You're paying her a big salary to say that.
And we're still undertaking...
You sacked 700 officers, yes or no?
And we're still undertaking 90,000 tests a year. And I think that's important. But what we mustn't do here is get away from the fact that there has been potentially a mass European-wide fraud going on. And I think as things unfold, we can see that certainly when it comes to the great British public being able to go out and buy food on our shelves and know what they're buying. Yes, there has been, I think, some enormous problems in people's
but is the
purchasing things which may not be what they expected
responsible for making sure that if you buy a cut of meat or you buy a hamburger which says it's beef, it is beef and not beef plus pork or beef plus horse? Is that the job of the FSA?
What the FSA is there to do is to make sure that we do have good standards, but it can't
is it responsible for the content?
But what it can't account for is the fact that there has been potentially a mass fraud on a European scale here, and I think we have to take that into account.
Why can't it account for that if it's doing its job?
When it comes to looking at who is culpable here, I think we have to say that those individual companies that are putting products on our shelves, labelling them as beef, and they're not being beef, then the responsibility really has to lie at the manufacturing
And so
arm.
George is wrong to say government should be able to do anything about it?
I think that the first and prime responsibility really has to be with the manufacturers, because all of us who go into our supermarkets expect the products on our shelves to be what is on the label.
OK, no, hold on. You've had your say. The woman up there, sorry. The woman up there, on the left, on the gangway, yes.
I think at the end of the day, the supermarkets don't much care where their products come from, as long as they get it for the right price and can make a lot of profit on it. And that's the issue at the end of the day. It's just profit. It's getting things as cheap as possible. And it's a shame, really, that we can't go back to using local independent stores that source their products locally. I appreciate the supermarkets for people that are on a really tight income are the answer, but we really need to get back to supporting our own local independent stores that can help us to know what we're eating.
OK. Thank you. Hold on. Susan Kramer, I'll come back to you about Labour's role, but Susan Kramer, what do you think?
Well, I strongly agree with the lady who just talked about local food. Look, this is fraud. It's got to be prosecuted. It's got to be hit hard. And I hope people end up in handcuffs and in jail as a consequence of this. But I am worried about the length of the food chain. I mean, this starts out in Romania, it goes to France, it goes to Holland, it's Sweden. I don't know that any regulator, no matter how staffed they are, and how good and strong they are, can really keep a grip on a food chain that is this long and this complex. And I hope that when we come out of this, there is some review of the sort of length of the food chain and whether or not we can shorten this and build much more, focused and intense traceability throughout the whole system. It may be more expensive, but, there is a price to pay when you go cheap. And that price is that you create an opportunity for bad people, and unfortunately there are bad people, to come in and exploit the system.
And do you make it easier for them by abolishing 700 food standard agency officers, or do you make it harder?
The sad part is you could probably have the 700, and I've no idea what different things they were doing. My question is, even if you had them back again, would that have made the key difference? Or is this so complex and so wide and so interesting, essentially, to the criminal bodies, that isn't going to be the answer? I mean, sometimes you have to look at the structure of things, not simply say, we just have to have a stronger regulator. Okay. I want a strong regulator, but we must look at structure. So, support your local butcher And if you have to eat a
make
little...
your own hamburgers?
Well, and if you have to eat a little less meat, but better meat, that is tough, and I know that's not easy. But there are other benefits that come with it.
Well, everybody could all become vegetarian. There are a lot of people with their hands up, so I'd like to hear your views, actually. The person there in spectacles, in the 1, 2, 3, 4th row, you.
Yeah, I've got 2 young children, and they're even asking me now what is safe to eat. They're looking on the news as well. And it's not just the beef burgers, it's the chicken that's coming out with the chicken nuggets and everything. And it is very worrying. And, you know, myself, and you think, well, who can you trust? You know, what can you trust to eat?
What do you say to them, and do you go on feeding them?
Oh, well, obviously I feed them.
No,
yeah.
of course you feed
well, yeah, no, I look on the boxes and it says all like 100% beef or 100% chicken, and it's not. There's 98% or 50% or 76%. So it's like, what are you actually eating that's, you know, it's packed with all these different ingredients.
Okay.
What can you trust?
And the man in the middle, bang in the middle there, up there, yes, you.
This horse meat scandal's been going on for almost a month now, and we're still no closer to finding out where it actually comes from or how many products are affected. Why is the government being so slow to act on this? And in regards to the lady's comment before about how it's travelling from Romania to France to Sweden, so it's too big, that's a bit of a cop-out answer. Saying, well, this task was too big, so we're not going to take it on, isn't right. If the task is too big, you need to take it on.
The panel listening carefully to this, but we'll hear from 1 or 2 other people. You, sir, the man in the blue and white striped shirt, yes.
I think the Food Standard Agency is in the same situation the financial services was in 4 years ago. I think the government hasn't got any hold of what's going on, and I think we're just being run by a bunch of Eton grads who don't know how to run a country.
Okay. The man in the bright blue with silver on, you there, sir.
I think what the problem is the government is it's not putting enough funds into the study of where the meat comes from. I mean, this horse meat, you know, horses get given this drug called, what is it, phenylbutane? Something, yeah. Now, that's obviously hazardous to humans, so surely that should be a red light for the government saying, hang on, why aren't we really being stringent with this and protecting people's lives? I mean, we can't really buy meat if everyone's going to start becoming ill, because, A, people are going to lose faith in the producers, supermarkets, the government, and there'd just be a total collapse.
OK, Mary Cray, do you think it's as dangerous as that, Butte? Because somebody was on television saying you'd have to eat 500 hamburgers a day to get even a trace of this Butte.
That's presumably in adults, but obviously the dose for children would be a lot lower.
So you're alarmed by it, are you?
No, no, what I say is that I raised the issue of Butte-contaminated horses being slaughtered in the UK with ministers on the floor of the House of Commons exactly 3 weeks ago. I had evidence that they were entering the food chain. What I want to know is, why did the government then start testing every horse in UK abattoirs, but still keep releasing them into the human food chain? That is simply not good enough. Ministers have been asleep on the job on this, and I'm afraid they cannot just keep hiding behind FSA officials on this, when actually they've been so catastrophically slow to act. And I just want to come back on this,
George Galloway said about
and
Labour.
the gentleman at the front who said we ended random testing. We did not end random testing. The last time we had intelligence that horse may have been in the food chain was 2003. There was no evidence from then to 2010
That's not
that
random,
had
then.
No,
That's
that is right.
intelligence-led.
That's right. It's intelligence-led, and the last piece of intelligence that the government received was in November last year, when the Food Safety Authority of Ireland said we're going to start testing for horse, and they thought, well, that's lovely. Ring us up when you've got the results.
Look, I think we've really got to be very careful. We've got to be very careful.
That's intelligence that was
So you've been attacked for being dozy on the job.
OK, I think we've got to be really careful here. I mean, yes, we need to have strong regulation in an area like this, but also I think we should expect that people who are producing products, putting them on our shelves, labelling them as beef, and they're not beef, they have to be held to account. And we need to make sure that people are not let off the hook here by some political will to try and point score, and I think that's a really important point.
But can I clarify one point, Maria? Is it, in your view, the government's job to make sure if I buy a can and it says beef, is it your job to make sure it is beef or somebody else's job?
I think it's absolutely squarely the role of both the manufacturer and also the retailer to make sure the products that are on their shelves are absolutely as they should be. I mean,
everybody is blaming government, both governments, for not checking that that's beef?
The government has got a role to check that, but the primary responsibility
You have got a role.
responsibility when you're dealing with a mass fraud on a pan-European scale this way, has already been said.
You say the government has a role, but I'd like to know what the role is, and whether you've been fulfilling it. George Galloway.
They're faffing around in this debate. The Liberal Democrats and the Tories want to blame it on criminals. I may say, if it's all just a criminal matter, why did the Tories take 3 weeks to call in the police? Because that's what it took them before they asked the police in this country to start treating it as a crime. But this goes to the heart of the matter. There are consequences to deregulation. The Tories are always talking about we need to get rid of red tape and deregulate this. These are the kind of consequences that occur when you deregulate. And there are consequences to sacking public servants.
So, George,
you sack
want to let the manufacturers off the hook?
No, but I hold you responsible for what happens in this country, not Findus. We didn't elect Findus. We can't remove Findus, but we can elect and we can remove you, and I promise you,
so you'll
the British
turn a
people are
blind
about
eye
to
to
do it.
people who
Look,
are potentially committing a fraud?
if you, not a blind eye, throw them in jail instead of in the House of Lords. The House of Lords is filled. I don't want a blind eye. I want you to face up to this. If you sack police officers, there are consequences. If you sack Food Standards Agency inspectors, there are consequences. It's time to end this cutting of public service workers as if public servants were some rubbish that can be easily dispensed of.
Just like to point out that in 2008, when the banks collapsed all over the entire world, we blamed Gordon Brown and Alistair Campbell, at least the Tory government, the Tory people did. Now that the entire country's food processing is into problem, we need to blame David Cameron and George Osborne. It buck stops with them.
Fraser Nelson?
Food labelling is a competence of the European Union, actually. We don't even have any control over it anymore. What happens in Brussels. The crime that happened in France. And the thing is, George, if your 700 food inspectors would come, you could have 7,000 of them. They would never be able to probe every freezer in every supermarket. And because we have millions of lines of food in this country.
Less? Is that what you're saying? Are you arguing it's better that we've got 700 less?
Also, the job is not to look for horses. Their job is to look for food safety, which means food poisoning, and there are 500 people who die every year of food poisoning. That's what the FSA does. It doesn't go around, to answer your question, checking to see if horses. Perhaps it should, but that's what these guys were doing. If they were back, perhaps, they probably would not have detected this. Now that...
No. Fraser, you said that actually it's a European competence. This government has blocked attempts by the European Commission to get labelling of country of origin labelling on processed meats. They blocked it in 2011. Owen Paterson went to Europe yesterday, came back and said, I want this labelling in by December the 31st. Suddenly he's had a sort of Damascene conversion to European regulation. The Eurosceptic suddenly wants more of it. It's been quite an extraordinary week in Parliament where we've had Bill Cash and Christopher Chope, the arch Eurosceptic, suddenly saying, European Commission has got to get on and do something about this.
Well, that's because we don't have the power to do it anymore in our own country.
Myth, but to cover up the fact that the Food Standards Agency, when it was set up by Labour, was a world leader in the whole area and it was independent from government.
And did it work well, given the results?
It worked well, and this government, when it came in, removed nutritional labelling to health, it removed compositional labelling, what is in the product, over to DEFRA. It's DEFRA ministers that are responsible for the labelling of your food.
And you think it is possible to check hamburgers, tinned food, the whole range of things.
Well, that's what ministers are telling us now.
If DEFRA is doing its job properly.
DEFRA has moved it back in-house. It's clearly not the right place for it to be. They've broken up the system. They've got to get on with it, put it right. If the system can't tell us if our food is fit to eat, then the system is not fit for purpose.
Well, not fit to eat, it's whether it's what it says.
Yes.
Nobody says
that's
horses
fit to eat. We don't want to eat beef when it's actually horse.
You're making a very dangerous blur here. I mean, the lady asked, her children are asking, is this food safe to eat? Now, to listen to the Labour Party over the last few days, you get the impression there was some public health hazard, and there isn't. It simply isn't the...
Horses...
Because horses are actually fine. I mean, The Spectator, we've got a guide about what to drink with horse meat this week's magazine. I mean, it's...
If it's coming in from criminals, then I doubt very much whether they followed proper food hygiene standards on the way in.
Let's just quote the Chief Medical Officer. I don't know whether the Chief Medical Officer, whether you trust what she says, but she says a person would have to eat 500 to 600, 100% horse meat burgers, just think of this, a day to get close to consuming a human's daily dose of bute. Who knows? The woman up there, the blonde lady on the right, yes.
What we haven't mentioned is actually who is eating these products. It is the poor, the people on low incomes, those that have been made unemployed by the government, people whose benefits are going to get squeezed because of bedroom tax, council tax changes and so on. These are the people that are buying the value products. It's the poor that are being defrauded, both by the way that the government is treating them and scapegoating them, and by now these alleged criminal gangs which are making their money out of other people's poverty. A lot of people are having to go to food banks because they can't actually afford to buy the food that they choose. So those that can buy their food are buying the lowest things because that's all they can afford, and they're the ones being conned.
OK. Do you know, I think on that note, though I know a number of you are still waiting to speak, we'd better move on because we've got a lot of other questions to come. You know at home you can join this debate, don't you, by Twitter or by text. Our hashtag for Twitter is BBCQT. We've got this new idea running of a Twitter panellist who comments, and you can comment on what the Twitter panellist says. It's Mark Pack from the website Lib Dem Voice tonight, and he's at BBC Extra Guest. If you want simply to text 83981, and the little red button will tell you what others are saying. OK, let's go on to another question. This is from Michael Joyce, please. Michael Joyce.
Should the 10p tax be reinstated?
This is the rage today, apart from the beef. Should the 10p tax, which was abolished by Gordon Brown, be reinstated? And it seems all the parties are circling around this, with the Tories backbenchers saying it should be, and Labour saying it may be, and I don't know where we've got to. Maria Miller, cast some light on this. Would you like to see the 10p tax reinstated?
Well, certainly what I want to see is the taxation regime in this country work better for people, particularly on lower incomes, and that's what we've been working on in the last 2.5 years. But my concern is the way that the Labour Party have said they're going to pay for this. And that they're going to pay for it through what they call a mansion tax. Now, that may sound on the surface very attractive, but then when you actually try and work out how that's actually going to happen, that anybody in this room who pays council tax will then be subject to their house being revalued. And I think that if you remember the record of Labour under the last government, where they doubled council tax for every single household in this country, saw the equivalent of a doubling of their council tax, and I think we should all be very concerned indeed.
But what would a mansion be, do you think?
I'm not sure I saw the detail of that yet. Perhaps
2 million.
Labour can...
£2 million.
2 million.
It's 2 million. It's nicked straight from the...
But the point is... the point is not... Sorry, the point is...
Are you old enough to remember the poll tax?
But the point is not that the mansions that are over £2 million would just be revalued. Every single household in this country would have to be revalued.
Come back to the 10p tax. From the Tories' point of view, are you in favour of it being reinstated, the 10p rate, or not?
Well, we've already cut taxes for 24 million people in this country.
Yes or no, are you in favour of the 10p tax?
Look, I'm not going to write the budget for the next...
Would you like to see it?
What I'd like to see is a proper tax regime in this country which actually supports people on lower incomes, and whether it's a 10p tax or in other ways.
Or whether... So you don't rule out the 10p thing?
I don't rule it out, but I think
a lot of backbenchers want it.
But I think we need to understand how it's going to be paid for, and that's really, I think, the concern that I've got.
But you'd like to see it in the budget if it could be paid for?
I think anything that reduces taxation has got to be a good thing.
All right. Well, I hope George is listening.
I am.
Susan Kramer.
The 10p isn't good enough. What we've done so far is raise the starting point of tax. All the people who used to be in that 10p band, and then, of course, Labour put it up to 20p, but that's all the people who used to be in that 10p band are no longer paying tax at all. They're completely out of the income tax category. Now, we're getting it up to, by the end of this Parliament, the starting point of tax will be £10,000 of earnings. That's up from about £6,490 when Labour was in power. We're arguing that should carry on up to the point you're really looking at minimum wage, so somewhere around the £12,000 mark. That's much more effective. It genuinely takes those people out of tax, but also it means that other people on the standard rate also benefit from the from the higher starting.
Are you in favour of the 10p tax being reinstated?
It's not enough.
But you're saying all these other things have been done?
No, I'm saying it's been done. It will be done by 2015 up to 10,000. It's now nearly at 9,000. It's got to go on to 12. That is a far better way to use your money. It's more costly, but it's far better than this silly business of a 10p rate affecting £1,000 of income.
I thought the Liberal Democrats rather wanted this.
We want to raise the threshold, which is a far more effective way. That's why all the people who used to pay 10p and were on that band, which Labour raised, are now out of tax altogether. So you think that they're not paying the 10p? You think that's exactly what we should be doing. Our tax cuts have to come to people at the bottom and people on standard rate. So are you, that's the only way you spread the burden.
Are you against what Ed Miliband said today about having a 10p rate?
I'm not
you say it's insufficient. Are you against it? Do you think that's the wrong way
altogether? I'm not going
to
water down what I'm talking about and what my colleagues are fighting for in order to do a sort of pettiness of the Ed Miliband. It's not sufficient.
Okay.
It's too petty.
All right. The man there in the middle with black hair. Yes, you're waving.
Well,
not drowning.
In the last decade, Labour only put the personal allowance up just over £2,000, and when you remove that 10p rate, you clobbered some of the most poorest people. And I know from my brother's point of view, who's earning only £11,000, that really, really hurt. So Labour, don't put this gimmick in of here's a 10p and then whack it back off poor people, because it's not fair at all and it gives them false hope. So don't do it just to take it away from people. It's not fair.
Mary Craig.
Well, in response to your point, what we're saying today is, yes, removing that 10p tax band was a mistake, and here's what we plan to do at the next election to put it right. We're clear that we've had some very difficult economic news, the Bank of England talking about living standards being squeezed over the next 3 or 4 years. We know that the economy is flatlining. We know that the economy shrank over the last 3 months. So it's absolutely imperative that we have a recovery that is led from the bottom upwards, not from the top downwards, which is what this government is doing. And Susan's colleagues voted in Parliament to give a tax cut for people earning over £1 million a year. They're going to be getting a £100,000 tax cut this year. We don't think that's the right way. We don't want to see trickle-down economics. What we want to see is bottom-up recovery, and that's what this country needs.
But in 10 years, though, you only put the personal allowance up £2,000. That's not good enough. 10 years and you only put the personal allowance up by £2,000.
You need to look at the whole package of what we offered people in terms of working tax credits. I know that didn't work for people who were single and didn't have children.
Or the young people
in terms of lifting,
as well.
we lifted 1 million people out of poverty, we lifted a million children out of poverty and 1 million pensions out of poverty. And they were significant achievements in terms of dealing with the problem of poverty in our society.
Can I just check one thing? Do you want to see this 10p tax rate as part of the next manifesto?
Well, we've said today this is our clear direction of travel. And this is a priority for us.
What's the direction of travel? I've no idea what the direction of travel is.
We are not right, unlike George Osborne, who promised to raise the inheritance tax threshold to over £1 million and then this week had to say, actually, I'm not going to be able to do that. We're not going to make promises that we can't keep. As the man said, we do not want to, we mustn't make promises and then renege on them. But what we are saying is we want a fairer tax system. This is where it starts. It's a clear way that we are moving, and we are consulting on how to get it absolutely right.
So nobody can believe you'll do it. You just talk about it.
It's not even in their manifesto.
No, that's not the case. We want to see this happen.
Ed Miliband and Ed Ball said, well, it's not going to be in the manifesto. So what is today all about?
It's not a manifesto promise.
Well,
we're 2 years away from the election.
Absolute
it wouldn't
waste
be sensible.
of time.
It wouldn't be sensible for
You've
us to
given
write
people false hope.
Well, I thought that it was a promise. I must have been driving up the M1 when this reneging on it occurred, and I was about to congratulate Mr. Miliband on finding some real Labour guts for a change. To say that a situation where some people live in £2 million mansions, and if they earn £1 million a year or more, they're getting a £100,000 tax cut, is the Tory Liberal way. The Labour way is to cut the taxes of the people at the bottom, not least because the people who earn the least, if you give them more by cutting their taxes, they'll spend it, and they'll spend it here, in our shops, on local services, local goods, and that will drive the economy. If you give a £100,000 tax rebate to a millionaire, he's spending it in Monte Carlo, or he's spending it on his villa in Nice, or on another foreign tour. The reality is, the poorest people, the best engine for the economy is to cut the taxes of the people at the bottom.
George, when you were involved with the governing party, you did not do it.
I'm one of
what
the...
is happening now,
let me tell you something.
Ironically,
thanks for the reminder. I'm one of the very few people who told Gordon Goldfinger Brown, the man that sold off all our gold at the bottom of the market, I'm one of the people who told them that scrapping the 10p tax rate was a grave mistake, one which has been acknowledged by Balls and Miliband today.
OK. The man up there in the second, very far back there. Yes, you.
My question to the panel is, what is the government doing about tax evasion in this country?
Doing about tax evasion? Well, it's slightly a different point. Anyway, Fraser Nelson.
The important thing about the 10p tax is that there's even less to it than meets the eye. Ed Balls was asked today, what will it mean for the actual worker, you know? And he was saying, well, £2 a week. But when you look at it, after you actually withdraw the benefits and the working tax credits, it works out at 66 pence a week. Now, that is what they call a promise, except it's not even a promise. Even that has been reneged upon. And I really think the low-paid in this country deserve a lot better than these pitiful suggestions and overtures that on closer inspection just collapse. Now, one of the things, I think the best thing this coalition government has done is actually cut tax for the poor by lifting people out of tax altogether. I mean, George talks about it being a Labour mission. The great irony is that it's the Tories and the Lib Dems who have done it. But I think we need to go much further. Right now, youth unemployment in Britain is at, I would say, crisis levels. So what I think we need to do is have a major tax cut for the low-paid. And by major, I would say give people the equivalent of a month's extra salary a year. Now, that really would, I think, bring help to the people who need it. And I really wish to God we would stop talking about these, you know, like 10p tax things, which always end up as being a con. They sound sort of nice to start with, but I really wish if the Labour Party was serious about helping working people, it would come up with something that would genuinely leave more money in their pockets.
So if just briefly, because then we'll keep with a similar point, but how would you pay for that 1 month?
Well, there's many ways you could do it. I still think there's a lot of waste in government, for example. I wouldn't be against actually borrowing more money to pay for that too. But right now, I don't think we've got the option of not cutting taxes because the current system is failing. The government is heading for economic failure and probably political failure.
So you'd increase the deficit, so you're a Keynesian, really?
Well, this is basic kind of economics, really. I mean, they did this in Sweden.
Why don't they do it if it's basic economics?
A good question. But they did this in Sweden recently, and it worked. Deficit-funded tax cut for the low-paid, and it worked.
We've talked about whether it would affect poorer people, and Fraser mentioned people out of work. Let's take a question from David Hawkes, which is relevant to this, please. David Hawkes.
Should people on benefits be made to work somewhere like Poundland to justify receiving their money?
This is the interesting case this week of Kat Riley, who complained that she'd been forced to work at Poundland, or told she would have to work at Poundland, or she would lose her benefits. And she took it to court, and the court decided, well, they decided something rather odd, actually, which was perfectly all right to tell people to go to Poundland, but that they hadn't got the procedure right. That's as far as I can understand it. George Galloway.
Well, I want to beatify Kate Riley. I think that she has done Britain a great service by taking this case, and the court, by its decision, has done so too. This is a young woman who had a voluntary job, unpaid, in a museum, who was forced by Ian Duncan Smith to take a job in Poundland. That's what we've become, Poundland, where people are frog-marched into working in Poundland and told that they're actually doing a job. We are deporting people from Camden, from Newham, to the north of the country, we are cutting public expenditure on a massive scale. We're introducing a bedroom tax, which I warn you now in case I don't get a chance later, this is David Cameron's poll tax, the bedroom tax. This is Britain today. A land where you go into a cheap chicken shop and you get horse, where the only economy in many of our northern cities is poundland, and where the Tory answer is to force people into working in these dodgy places for pitiful wages rather than a real economy, the one that we need to build.
Maria Miller.
I'm not sure I really accept the way that George is talking down the really important role that work experience can have in many people's lives. I mean, actually, the facts
in
here...
Poundland.
The facts... OK, the facts, because we can't let facts get in the way of a good story, the facts are actually the court said that the government was quite right to use things like work experience to give people the opportunity to get into jobs. And let's remember, these are people who are on job seekers allowance, they're not people who are being unpaid, and it gave them the sort of experience which might get them their next job. Surely we should be applauding organisations that do that and give young people in this country the opportunity to get the skills to get ahead. I just don't think it's right to be writing people off to a lifetime on benefits. Let's give them the opportunity to get ahead.
In a museum,
Let's
you put her into Poundland, for God's sake.
Look, and I mean, let's be clear here. What all the court said was that there was a technical issue around the government's policy, but the main thrust of the policy was perfectly acceptable, and I think that's something that's important, and I think we should be, again, applauding those employers that go out of their way to give young people in this country a chance.
OK. You, sir.
Yeah. Whilst it's important for young people to get experience, you have to make sure it's relevant to their skills and in getting them into a job. There's no point giving a person who is, one, volunteering, two, educated at university, to then force them just to do cleaning jobs, menial jobs that don't actually help them get into work. What you have to provide is meaningful placements that will support them in developing skills and getting into real job prospects, not just simply using it as a form of punishment because you're on benefits. It has to be driven by providing skills to help people into jobs, not just to get them...
Susan Kramer, do you think it was a... Was Cat Riley suffering a form of punishment, in your view?
I'm a huge fan of work experience, and if I'd been unemployed for over a year and my volunteer job wasn't doing me any good in terms of getting an employer to take me seriously, and somebody offered me a few weeks or a couple of months' work somewhere, you know, I'm getting my benefits, so that, you know, in a sense I owe back, I think, for my benefits, I would take it. And if one of my children was in that situation, I would tell them to go and take it. Because when you're actually in a job, even if it's in that kind of setup, everyone knows it's far easier to then get another job. You go and apply and you can push. And I think work experience, I don't regard jobs as particularly menial. There are all kinds of jobs from which you can learn a whole series of different experiences. It's terrific if you can find something that fills a real gap in your training. I think that would be fantastic. I would go for work experience.
Cat Riley was a geology graduate. She was a geology graduate who wanted to work in the museum sector, so surely she was rather in the round hole in a round...
You know, I don't want to talk about one particular individual, but we can at least accept, can't we, that her CV wasn't selling her to employers. They weren't coming out and offering her jobs. So she's either in a situation of saying, I will take nothing, I'll stay on benefits till I get a job in the area I want, or you have to then compromise and take jobs in other areas. That's what I would do personally. You know, I will take any job rather than be unemployed, and I give exactly the same message to my children. And from there, you build up, and hopefully you find the job that's in your field.
Okay.
But I don't have a problem with work experience. I think we ought to really respect it.
Thank you, Susan. The man in the spectacles there.
I think the problem is, and why this girl was probably so angry, is that another big failing of the Lib Dems, the rise in tuition fees and things like that, increasingly people aren't going to put up with this kind of thing.
Well, she wouldn't be paying under the Lib Dem system. She wouldn't be paying fees up front. She wouldn't be paying her loan back until she was earning £21,000, and she'd be learning it back at a lower rate than she did under Labour. So it's
why
not
did you
right.
pledge the opposite then before the last general election? Why did you sign in blood that you would scrap tuition fees?
We were wrong.
I want to go to the back of the audience, because there are not many people up there with hands up who've not had a chance at the moment. There's a woman in the second row from the back. Yes, you, madam. Yeah, you.
Yeah, I was just going to say there are a lot of things wrong with the welfare state, but I'm glad it's there. I would rather have it there than it not be there. And I think that a lot of people who claim benefits have previously been in work and paid their stamp. It's not like they're getting something for nothing.
OK. And the man 6 along there, you with spectacles on, sir. Yes.
I understand that Ms Riley is now working in a supermarket, so it looks like perhaps that scheme was particularly effective in her case.
Mary Cray.
Well, I think it comes back to the issue of competence, doesn't it? Because what we had, as you say, is a judgment that says there's nothing wrong with work experience, but the way the government laid the regulations, made the regulations, means it was not legal. And the failure to explain to the young lady her right to refuse work, etc., means that the government laid itself wide open and had this very embarrassing court defeat. I started my working life in British Home Stores, and I did tights and I did lights for 2 years as a Saturday girl, and I don't think it was a paid job, and I learned an awful lot about customer service and about cleaning and about all sorts of things. So I'm not against work experience, but what we can't have is a work experience programme that isn't just for a few months. This can go on for 2 years, and people only go on it when they've been unemployed for 9 months. You cannot have people coming out after 2 years of work experience and 9 months on the dole with nothing to show for it. There's got to be training alongside it, and there's got to be some sort of training pathway and hope that there's going to be something better. We cannot just park people on work experience programmes and say, oh, something will turn up.
Fraser Nelson.
I think there's no doubt the government messed up this particular case. The court said that. But it's important to draw a distinction between that. I mean, the easier thing to do would be to write the welfare cheque and walk away. And I think that one of the great failures of the last Labour government is that that's what it did. It took the easy road to write the welfare cheque, walk away, and basically condemn millions of people to poverty. Now, a welfare state, you're right, it is worth something. It needs to be protected, it needs to work. But right now, it's creating the most expensive poverty in the world. That's what we're doing here. We are actually condemning people to live in these jobless, workless ghettos who will never be able to get back into the habit of work. And when the government tries to do better, it will get it wrong, as it did in this case, but I think, thank God it's trying, because the alternative, leaving these people, is something that we just can't afford to do anymore.
OK. And I'll take one more point from the person with the tinted spectacles in the third row from the back.
I think part of our problem is in education, that we're not educating the people that society actually needs. There are a hell of a lot of people today who go to uni, as they call it, and get a degree, and then find they can't get a job that's suited to their intellectual level. And I don't think we're training enough creative and practical people for the creative, practical jobs, plumbers, gas fitters, people like that. Yeah. And I think this is part of the problem.
You're absolutely right. We need to do much more on vocational and technical education in this country. And for too long, there's been a focus on the aspiration of 50% to university, and not enough for young people who have those creative talents.
But we've also got a work
which
programme, you guys didn't work
We've
out.
Also got a work
we now
programme.
have 1 million people on apprenticeship schemes.
We have a programme now, a work programme where you're more likely to get a job if you're not on it than if you are on it, Fraser. That is not a welfare system that's working.
Now, we've got a good heated up audience here on politics, and we've got 4 politicians on the panel and a political commentator. So I want to go to the next question and widen this out a bit and ask you, as politicians, not just to list your policies, but to listen carefully to what the question says. Elliot Hill, it comes from, please. Elliot Hill.
With public scepticism towards MPs, similarities between the major parties and a decrease in party membership, is party politics dying?
Is party politics dying? You start, Fraser Nelson.
I think people talk a lot about apathy in Britain, about how people can't be bothered to vote anymore. But if you look at the amount of engagement in Britain, we're actually an incredibly passionate country when it comes to people go on marches, they attend protests. You get groups like 38 Degrees who did brilliant protests against the Taxpayers Alliance on fuel tax. People get passionate, but they're not very excited at the menu that they get on the polling day. A lot of people can't bring themselves to choose one of these parties who probably break their promise anyway if they go into coalition with somebody else. I don't think our politics in Britain is broken, but I do think that our party political system is broken. These guys try to copy each other too much. They don't follow through on what they say they would do. And I really do think that we need renewal of politics in this country, because the way things are going, really, turnout is going to go lower and lower and lower because people think, well, what's the point? You know, no matter who you vote for, the government still gets in.
Maria Miller, the accusation is that political parties, not just the Conservatives, your party, but all political parties, don't follow through with what they say, and people have become cynical about it as a result.
I simply don't agree with that. When I go into schools and colleges in my constituency and I hear the passion that young people have for issues like the environment, like climate change, I was talking recently to a group about the work of Amnesty International. I think there's an enormous passion amongst young people for political issues. I think the challenge for all of us at the moment is to make sure that we're communicating to that new generation, making sure that we're showing them the very different approaches that each of the parties take to these issues. And I do think there's this difference there. And I think that the real challenge for us at the moment is something completely new for our country, well, new really for the modern day, which is coalition government. And making sure that individuals know that, voters know that whilst you can work with a party on issues, there's still considerable differences between your parties on many of those issues that you may want to vote out with the general election. And I think that's an interesting challenge.
But you think people are not sceptical towards MPs, as Elliot Hill suggests?
I think, of course, there'll always be scepticism about people in power, but I think in terms of politics and the important role that politics has in the lives of all of us, and particularly young people, I don't see that.
Too many similarities, Susan Kramer, between the major parties. You got involved in the coalition. You may be in another coalition, I suppose, after the next election.
Well, we think coalition has a lot to offer, because when I talk to people, and they see the sort of, if you like, the time when party politics is the kind of clash at Prime Minister's questions, for example, they regard that as sort of entertainment, but actually they want people to work together. And I do think this sort of pressure, particularly when we're in a time of financial austerity with such economic difficulties, the notion of people having to come to work together, that there aren't instant answers, that it's the art of the possible, that you have to move things, particularly when you're trying to remedy the damage that's been done to an economy, essentially over a 20-year period, and you're trying to change all those fundamentals, get people to have skills, get small businesses started, get the banks functional again after all that they've done to themselves, and get credit going.
You're going into politics now.
In a sense.
Is party politics dying? Is the politics, the commitment to MPs, which is what the question is about?
Well, I think we're in a period where cooperation and consensus have a lot more to offer, and people are looking at it that way.
Right.
As for MPs, I mean, I think it's true that with the scandals that we had in the past, MPs lost trust. And in a way, I think you can say rightly so. And I recognise I'm part of the political group that not individually but collectively lost that trust, and we're going to have to earn it back again.
Let's hear from our audience again.
But I do think consensus has a lot to offer.
All right, let's hear from our audience. The person in purple there, and then I'll go back up there. You.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, if you say you're all sort of fighting for the people, when do you listen to the people that you are there for?
You think that doesn't...
No, you don't listen to the people. You've got to listen to the people, what they want, what's interesting.
And are you talking about any particular party or all MPs? You think
all
no
MPs,
MPs?
yeah,
George Galloway? Does George Galloway listen? Does George listen to you?
Well, I think the only people that's here for the party for the people is the Labour, because they actually listen to the people.
George Galloway, what do you make of the main question?
Well, I agree with Fraser Nelson, and that doesn't happen often. Actually, people in this country are fantastically interested in politics. I have hundreds of thousands of people following me on Twitter and Facebook, And not only are they absolutely engaged with all the vital political issues of the day, they're extremely well informed, oftentimes better informed than I am about some of the issues that are in front of us this evening. The problem is, in this country, the political parties, Tweedledee, Tweedledum, Tweedledee and a half. If a backside could have 3 cheeks, these would be the 3 cheeks.
I've heard that one
and there's
before.
no difference. It's a good one, though.
Yeah.
It's a good one, though.
I always say, stop me if I've heard it before.
Why don't you think of something memorable to say that people will remember? Because
slapping
that's
yours
what
at the
we
end of the show.
needed. That's what's needed. The reality is, these 3 parties believe that politics has only an inch in which we can differ. That we differ about the colour of the walls that we'll paint the departments in Whitehall. That it'll be a penny off this, a penny on that. In reality, people know that this country isn't working, that our institutions are in a state of collapse, and that a radical change is necessary. And if you put forward a radical change, people may or may not agree with the radical change you propose, but they are ready to listen to it. And my last point is this. I'm sorry, I don't want to get personal. But we have a parliament full of expenses frauds. We have a parliament that's almost always on holiday. Since I was elected 11 months ago, Parliament has been on holiday almost 50% of the time. And the rest of the time, they're filling in their expenses forms. That's the face of British politics so far, including in the House of Lords.
Unless I'm
including
deaf,
in the
George,
House of Lords.
Unless I'm deaf, when you arrive, they complain that you're never there now.
I'm there every day.
Where are you?
No. I'm in Parliament every day, and my expenses are virtually the lowest in England. And people are following what I have to say because I'm different from these 3 cheeks
Can I say,
of the
George,
same
that if
backside.
you're actually doing your job as a Member of Parliament when we're in recess, what we're supposed to be doing is actually in our constituencies,
You're on
working with
beaches.
our,
You're
with our
lying on
constituents
beaches.
there.
All right,
And I think you may be
Four
lying.
behind you, four behind, 4 is behind.
Isn't it our democratic system that's actually broken? I go to a polling booth and have to vote for the best of a bad bunch because I don't want the Tories to get in. It's not who I want to vote for, but it's who's going to stop a different party getting in. If AV had gone in, or we did have proportional representation, I would be able to vote for who I believed in, rather than who would stop the Tories from getting in.
We tried.
Mary Cray, hold on. Mary Cray.
Well, I don't think our society's broken, and I don't think politics is broken, and I think that George Galloway's rhetoric about how awful everything is actually dangerous and deeply, deeply cynical. I'm ambitious for this country. I didn't come into politics to govern slightly better or to make little changes. I came into politics because I wanted to change the world, and I started that as a local councillor. I've carried on being elected to being an MP, and I go out every Friday when I'm at home in Wakefield. I go out and listen to the people, and I meet them picking up their children from the school gates in the snow, in the hail, in the sun. They'll see me there. I've got 30-odd schools, and I go around every one of them. I listen to what people tell me, and when they tell me stuff, I act. I take out the police with me sometimes, and I'm passionate about the role that politicians can play. And if you go to countries where politics really is broken, I went to South Sudan last year, I went to Rwanda, I've been to Congo, I've been to places where terrible things have happened because of catastrophic political failure. I don't think people in this country really understand just how lucky we are with our system.
All right, can I go back to Elliot Hill, who asked the question? What do you think of what you've heard, and what's your view?
I think there's a big difference between passion over politics and passion for parties in politics. I notice a few panel members sort of talking about this, Amnesty International, I think Maria Miller said, and people being really interested in these political issues, and that's definitely true. But whether they're so interested in parties is a different matter. I think they're on the way out if they don't do something. And the minute the public do realise that parties are expendable and they can work very well, politics can work very well without them, it might well change the entire political system.
So you have more independent MPs, you mean?
Perhaps, yeah.
The man in the white suit there. You, sir.
One thing, we're talking about coalition and working together as being the solution to political problems. I have to disagree with that when the Liberal Democrats voted against the boundary changes for constituencies very recently, and therefore the public see that politicians are playing their own game. If it's in their favour, we'll vote against it. But that's playing against what the public need, which is a fair say in who gets elected.
Fraser Nelson, do you agree with that on this boundary change point?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is the thing. Politicians going about constitutional reform, but only the type that benefits their own party. And it's really depressing. You could tell that they broke the deal, and you can pretty much write the script. But I'd say to Elliot, if you think the situation is bad now, then wait until they get state funding for political parties. I mean, right now, they're losing members, all the main political parties, and they're in problems because they've got to find financing. Now, if they say, God, nobody wants to give us money, so let's get the government to give us a bailout. Now, that's still on the cards, which is why it's so important it should never happen, because they should be forced, all of them, Labour, Tories, the Lib Dems, to go and find ideas that people think are worth supporting. Either do that or go bust.
And yet the drop in membership is absolutely staggering, isn't it? When
the Tories have halved under Cameron alone, pretty much.
In the 50s, the Tories had 3 million members, Labour had 1 million members. You, sir, on the left here.
Yeah, doesn't the panel think that the despondency shown by the general public at the moment towards the political parties, is it not because, you know, before an election, they promise, all parties promise this, that and the other, so they vote them in, and then after, they renege on what they've promised.
And has it ever been different, in your view?
Yeah,
no.
It was.
No, it was.
Every single election, they've always gone back on what they
Parties
said.
used to be very different, but now the Tories are giving us just as much debt as Labour was planning to, so you do wonder what all that fuss was about.
We're a bit out of time, but because of where we are, I'm just going to take this question from Joseph Sharp, and it'll be a yes or no around the panel. Joseph Sharp, please.
OK, just like to ask the panel, where should Richard III be buried? Leicester, Westminster or York?
Or indeed Gloucester, as some have said. George, quickly.
Has to be York. He built a mausoleum for himself there. and a person's last wishes should be honoured. He wanted it to be York. It must be York.
Maria Miller?
Well, we've made sure that Leicester University has got some say in this, and I think there's a sort of a rule generally that when you exhume bodies from the ground, you try and rebury them somewhere close to where they were taken out.
OK, Mary?
It's
one for Leicester.
I think
Westminster, where his wife is.
Richard has been lying under Leicester Council Social Services car park for the last 500 years. I think he deserves a decent burial in Leicester Cathedral.
Finders keepers.
I thought you were saying Findus for a moment.
Well, not that bad.
I think he should be buried with his wife, and Neville is buried in Westminster, but I know I'd certainly like to be, so I think if he were, you know, alive, which obviously he's not, he buried her there, he'd probably want to be with her. Most people do.
What, say Westminster Abbey?
Yeah.
OK, fine. That's it. I'm sorry. And, well, it's perfectly obvious where everybody here wants him buried. Our hour's up. We're going to be in St Paul's Cathedral. You mentioned St Paul's. St Paul's Cathedral, where Nelson is buried.
He was buried in 3 different places. They kind of broke him up and scattered him.
Yes, thank you. We've got to stop, Susan.
I like dissection.
Thank you. We're in St Paul's Cathedral next week, and in fact, it's the first time Question Time has come from St Paul's. Our panellists are going to include Vince Cable, Michael Heseltine and Diane Abbott. And the week after that, we're going to be at the site of the Hampshire by-election in Eastleigh. We'll be going live just after the polls closed on that by-election triggered by Chris Huhne's plea of guilty, of course, in the courts. Now, if you'd like to come either to St Paul's or to Eastleigh, you can apply by our website. The address is there on the screen. Or you can call us 0330 123 99 88. You'll be catechised by our administrators. It will be extremely nice to see you for those 2 occasions. My thanks to our panel here and to all of you who came to take part in this programme from Question Time here in Leicester. Until next Thursday, good night.